All right.
Welcome, welcome. Thank you for spending some time with me today. And
Thank you.
I have been bragging about this program to students and encouraging students to get involved in the program and in understanding what applied behavior analysis is. So I really appreciate you taking some time out your schedule to talk about it. So, Dr. Jennifer. Tell us a little bit about who you are at UH, the program, just a little overview.
Of course. So yeah, I'm Jennifer Ninci. I work in the special education department. In the special education department, we have a variety of programs that students can focus in. Best place to learn about those would probably be to go to the special education department website. I coordinate our applied behavior analysis programs, and those are programs that are include verified course sequences, they're called, that are verified by the Behavior Analyst Certification Board. So that's BACB. The BACB coordinates a couple different programs and outlines their requirements for BACB certifications. So there's a BCBA, which is a Board Certified Behavior Analyst. There's also a Board Certified Assistant Behavior Analyst, and that's a BCABA. So we have two program options for those different credentials. At the master's level is the BCBA. So that requires a master's degree. It requires a verified course sequence that can be embedded into the master's degree. So that's kind of nice because the course sequence of behavior analytic content is embedded into the what might be typically elective courses. And then there's also core courses that you take in the special education department. And that's a 30, I believe 31 credit program.
Okay.
The master's level. But then there's also the BCABA, which is just a sequence of courses that could be added on to somebody that already has a bachelor's degree or is in kind of the tail end of their bachelor's degree, is how we do it at UH. It can actually count as an education minor in part as well for undergraduate students.
So you could be, say for instance, you're a junior or a senior and you could do the educational minor, but your minor can be the applied behavioral analysis coursework, sequential coursework that will lead to you having the opportunity to do your credentialing.
Yes, and well, only part of that coursework counts because some of it is actually graduate coursework, graduate level classes.
Okay.
So depending on, I guess, you'd meet with your advisor and see what could count, but we have about, I believe, 3 courses can count in the BCABA. So actually, a lot of people don't know that, as I was mentioning earlier. I think most of our students that do come from the psychology undergraduate program might not treat it as a minor, an education minor, but they might actually just count some of that coursework toward their degree as electives instead. So that's another option.
Okay.
But yeah, they don't have to have their undergraduate already to get the BCABA. Just be, like you said, a junior or senior. And then if they didn't want to consider the BCABA option, because that's a career path in and of itself, to be an assistant behavior analyst, and we can talk about kind of the differences in those career paths in a moment.
Okay.
But then you could also get the BCBA, which again requires a master's degree. You don't have to have a master's degree from UH. You can actually take the verified course sequence itself. So let's say if you already have a master's in social work or speech language pathology or another very similar overlapping field that works quite well with our program and the field of behavior analysis, like such as through the psychology department, you could get a master's degree. You could add that course sequence on as an unclassified student. You wouldn't be in an official program that's a certificate seeking program, or a degree seeking program, but it would be able to allow you to be eligible to get the BCBA certification. So again, that coursework requirement, the degree level requirement, and then there's a requirement on supervision fieldwork hours for each of those credential levels.
Okay. Now you mentioned, can you tell us the difference between kind of the career paths or the difference between the various levels?
Yes. Okay, so the assistant behavior analyst will go out and actually have a nice balance of direct service provision for clients or students that they work with. And they'll also be eligible to supervise others, including registered behavior technicians, usually is the case of who they're supervising. And registered behavior technicians is really a level in and of itself. And that's kind of considered like an entry-level paraprofessional position in the field of behavior analysis. Registered behavior technicians are doing direct service provision, very similar to like a direct care staff or a paraprofessional at a facility or a school. And to take a registered behavior technician, to do that credential, it's like a 40-hour training plus competency-based assessment and an exam. And so that's kind of like entry level. You end up working quite directly with individuals to implement applied behavior analysis programs. And at the BCABA, like I said, you're able to do a lot of work that the BCBA does, but also you all kind of have a foot in similar to the registered behavior technician, where you do a lot of direct service provision. Now, a BCBA, a board certified behavior analyst, can oversee BCABAs and registered behavior technicians, and they end up doing a lot of supervisory work and practices. And to get that BCBA, they study and work directly with individuals over time and gain experience with that, but also they gain experiences in conducting assessments and leading those and directing programs, writing reports. The BCABA writes reports and programs as well, but they do have to be overseen by a BCBA for a minimum percentage of their hours. Mm-hmm. So there's some collaboration and oversight with that kind of a relationship where a BCABA does have to work with a BCBA. A BCBA is doing more on the area of program oversight and directing. However, it is important to work and continue to stay in practice and get on the floor and work with your clients or kids every now and again, depending on your population of who you're working with, could be adults. And in those cases, for instance, you want to be able to model and as part of your supervisory practice, you're modeling practices for the people you're supervising. So you do get to do a lot of that, but there's also a lot of behind the scenes, behind the computer. You can work in different settings. So there's different funding sources for applied behavior analysis services. Ultimately, it could be a medical model of funding where it's insurance funded. It could be educational, where it's required in the student's individualized education program to have applied behavior analysis services. And those are kind of the two routes that are probably most frequently often seen. There's also, adult services and working in various contexts, such as residential treatment facilities, can work with students with severe behavior challenges, severe challenging behavior, can work with individuals in early childhood contexts, can work in geriatric settings.
And I was going to ask what about the geriatric settings, because that's consistent happening around the world. We have an older and older population, and things like dementia and various forms of dementia, and the ability to manage clients in those settings. So that's what I was thinking as well.
Yeah, I wish to see more applications in that area. I'd say the research base and the practice currently is pretty dominated in the area of autism. But it's important to note that also it's very broadly applicable. It's also very much researched in the area of disabilities as well. Like our program is housed in a special education program. Our program is pretty focused on not just autism, but also extensive support needs broadly, individuals with severe disabilities, individuals with complex communication needs. We focus a lot on augmentative and alternative communication modes for individuals who don't use speech to communicate. And we do have in our master's program quite the focus on special education applications specifically, although we do have a lot of people coming through our program that do provide insurance funded ABA services in like more of a clinic context.
Okay. So if a student was like, well, what kind of things would I do? Could you give me an example of kind of like a real concrete example of what a registered behavioral technician would do? versus the other levels, kind of move up the level? I know you
Yeah.
mentioned it kind of briefly, but could you
More specifically.
give me an example?
Okay, great. So a registered behavior technician, typically they have maybe one, two, maybe two clients at a time. Oftentimes the way that it's kind of working as you see it in practice, I'd say this is what I'm seeing from my perspective is registered behavior technicians don't work with a whole lot of students usually. And typically they're working with individuals with autism. And when thinking about the current context in Hawaii, for instance, because there's insurance funded services for individuals with autism.
Oh, wow.
And yes, and then there's behavior analysts as one person who can provide that service as well as registered behavior technicians in various settings. And so there's licensure for behavior analysts in the state of Hawaii that passed as a companion bill to insurance funded services for autism. Other populations, other people can provide that service, and there's a lot of overlapping fields. So behavior analysts is, as well as, for instance, licensed psychologists can also design programs for applied behavior analysis. So there's a lot of overlap between those fields. There's also a lot of overlap between the field of special education. So like I said earlier, registered behavior technicians often will work in like a special education classroom setting, but sometimes they could also work in a clinic setting or a home-based setting to provide maybe support with like parent implementation of ABA supports, and also home-based services directly in the home where they're implementing something, like for instance, teaching daily living skills in the home, working on priorities like toileting or dressing yourself, self-care, home care, things like that.
Okay, that's excellent. That's excellent. So when did this pass, this level of credentialing pass? When did that law go into effect? How long has it been in effect?
Yes, I believe it was 2015, and iterations have happened since then that are a little bit newer, that have slight changes to it. So it's slightly changed over time in terms of like the licensure law, but the autism insurance funding, I believe that's stayed the same and passed in 2015, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Take or leave some. I think it could be earlier than that, but I'm pretty sure 2015. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So as you said, if you get the ABA, is there another letter?
Oh, the BCBA. Or
Yeah,
the
BCBA. Yes.
Yeah, it's quite the learning curve. All
right,
that.
right. BCBA. Then you could do independent practice.
Yes, you could. And by the way, it's worth mentioning that all of these credentials cross state lines very well. A lot of states at this point have licensure for behavior analysts, not quite all of them, but all of them do now have autism insurance that covers, insurance funded applied behavior analysis service under like a medical model, so that they can receive some extra supports after school or on weekends if you're talking about school-based populations, or in homes, or in a clinic-based context. Sometimes it does replace like a school-based context for some students. It serves as, for instance, like a private school for some individuals. So depending on the context of kind of where you're at and how they coordinate their services from a medical and educational model, that kind of varies across the different states. But it's good to know that there is a high need for BCBAs and BCABAs and RBTs across all 50 states and also outside of the United States and regions. So.
Excellent, excellent. And then I think, students need to take note of that, because portability, as we kind of refer to it, is really important. And in psychology, they just started what they call PsyPAT. And I think there's 34 states that have passed legislation where if you're licensed in one particular state, then you could practice, do telehealth, telemedicine in another state. Unfortunately, Hawaii is not one of those.
Not yet.
Not yet. We're not even down the pike yet. I don't know, hopefully we'll get down the pike, but I have a lot of friends who are in private practice, Maryland, Ohio, Georgia, and they can practice across state lines. You have to do some additional, you have to do some additional, continuing education training and know about the laws of the state that you're going to practice in. But when you get under the organization, that they provide that information for you so you can practice with competency. And I think that's very important. And the other thing that you're saying about this is that, if you get that credentialing, then you can work independently. And I think that's a lot of very important to consider, especially with the cost of higher education. When I went to school, it was far not as expensive as it is today. And I always tell my students, if I was in school right now, I probably would not end up in this pathway that I ended up in as many years ago, just because of the cost and what is available now, just like this kind of credentialing, credentials that you can get. Now, I do have a question about, getting the credentials. You say there's competency exams or standardized exams. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So at the undergraduate level, RBT, actually all you need for that is a high school diploma. And then you take the 40-hour training. I mean, of course, you could have more than a high school diploma, but that's the minimum requirement. Then you take the 40-hour training where you learn in different content areas of applied behavior analysis. There's actually some free trainings out there. A lot of clinics will train you as an RBT and do that competency-based assessment after your 40-hour training, where you, for instance, implement with a student or a client or with the supervisor themselves a variety of practices like shaping a behavior, for instance, or chaining, or there's different things you get to try out. And so then you also take that exam, which is a BCABA regulated by Pearson exam that you actually sit for at a testing center. And the pass rates and everything for like the RBT credential are actually recently posted online for different programs. Same for BCBAs and BCABAs. So if you're looking for a good quality program, you can go find pass rates online. Now the pass rates actually for, I kind of just segued into pass rates since I mentioned it, for RBT credentials are, relatively high. I don't know exactly about the average, but I believe you can retake that exam if you need to. Now then for the BCBA and the BCABA, they're very similar. They have different numbers of content hours and supervision hour requirements, but both require content hours and applied behavior analysis, the degree requirements at each level. Remember, BCABA is the undergrad, BCBA, you need to have the master's. You have that embedded coursework where you take it as a sequence after your degree. And then you also have pretty substantial supervision fieldwork requirement, where a BCBA or a couple other categories that are eligible to supervise will supervise you in practice to work specifically toward that credential. So it's quite a structured supervision experience. There's a contract, there's tracking of your hours, and there's assessment of the quality of supervision on behalf of the supervisor along the way until you get a minimum number of hours. For instance, for BCBA, that's 1,500 total hours or 2,000, depending on how much supervision you're getting. BCABA is a little bit less than that for the BCBA credential. So a percentage of those need to be supervised along the way, where, for instance, you're working as an RBT, you can go for that BCBA or BCABA credential and actually count a lot of your practice hours where you're implementing ABA programs with your clients or students toward your supervision hours as well. So that's kind of nice that it can work toward your job requirements. So I think that's why a lot of people are going for it. It's a pretty nice deal. I mean, I know how much people get paid matters to a lot of people, especially in this climate in Hawaii. It's nice to make above minimum wage for sure. And
Right.
So a lot of RBTs are making $15 to $25 out there in this entry-level paraprofessional position. And it's very rewarding. And to be able to work with and witness kids learning things when they're given the environment that's going to suit their needs. So it's quite rewarding for people that are interested in that kind of thing. There's a lot of working one-to-one. there's a lot of working in groups as well. And that also kind of depends on your context in which you're working. So.
Excellent, excellent. I just feel that it's a very good pathway for a number of people who are interested in, if they want to go into the helping profession, even if they're interested in, especially if they're interested in working with children and parents. But like you said, the application for applied behavioral analysis is broader than just working with developmental disabilities. And if you get that, like you said, that credentialing where you can work for yourself, you could create a niche based upon the skill set that you have that expands beyond that population of individuals. So, that's what I think is very appealing. I'm always into, the flexibility of our career paths. Like psychology can be very, very flexible. I always say it's a very good career especially for women, especially women who want to raise their children or get married and have children, or not be married and have children. That flexibility of you kind of writing your own path and not doing kind of the traditional things. So this is kind of the same way I see applied behavioral analysis as well. Now,
I do see a lot of people working, running their own businesses, starting their own private practice as behavior analysts. So that's
really cool. Now, for the sake of, what applied behavioral analysis is and how it's applied, can you give an example, maybe from your experience, of application of applied behavioral analysis technique, like shaping, extinction, stimulus control, or something a little brief to give the students an idea of what you would do at your level?
Sure. So in the special education department, again, we're focused on that particular area. And like you mentioned, there's areas outside of that. Talk about geriatrics, there's applications. Somebody I know right now is working with NASA. A lot of people are interested in going to the area of sustainability. But for the purposes of talking about one very common practice area, we can talk about applied behavior analysis and working with individuals with developmental disabilities. And oftentimes this population, and why it's so big with this population is because what it translates into practice in terms of what it looks like is can be kind of summed up into systematic and explicit instruction, where you're providing explicit cues for behaviors to occur in the relevant environmental contexts, or you might be contriving motivation or sort of capturing it in the moment to make sure that they're motivated to engage in a certain behavior and reinforcing that behavior. And so there's different techniques that kind of manipulate the antecedents and consequences to behaviors that you target. Now, the applied part of it is that means that it's applied to only socially significant behaviors, those that you'd want to teach somebody else to do, or those that you'd want to reduce for really important purposes, like it's harming that person or somebody else in their environment. So one very common application, which is probably like a really bread and butter technique in the field, is, we're looking at the purposes of the behavior, why it might be occurring in the environment. And we might need to replace a behavior that's maladaptive with something socially significant and important, something that's going to work for them in their environment to be able to get something that they want or remove something that they're not okay with. And now going back to this population, oftentimes needs an alternative mode to communicate other than speech, because they might not be able to speak to communicate. But everybody communicates in different ways, and there's different augmentative and alternative communication methods that they could learn to replace, for instance, oftentimes maladaptive or challenging behavior. Like it might be, I'm pulling you to get to that thing I want, or it might be, I'm screaming because I want to get away from all this noise in this room right now. We could teach them to ask to leave the room if that's what's the aversive thing that they want to get away from. So we assess that, reason their behaviors occurring, and we replace it with a socially significant way to communicate that's going to work for them in their environment, that's going to be easier than the challenging behavior. It could be to avoid a certain sensory experience as well, or something that's not necessarily socially mediated, what I'm currently talking about is something that's typically implemented with socially mediated behaviors like escaping or accessing attention, escaping or accessing certain tangible or activity stimuli in your environment, like having to do work. Maybe you want to get away from the work, for instance. So we teach the individuals to communicate what they want, and we honor that communication, and we put the challenging behavior on extinction, which means we no longer reinforce it. So what that looks like for somebody that doesn't want to work at that moment because a very difficult problem was presented to them, we can teach them to say, I need a break, for instance. And we're no longer going to reinforce when they clear the table of all the work. We're going to, in fact, hold the demand and prompt them to engage in the communication to ask for a break, right? So that way, if they don't want to work right now, that's cool. It's more important to teach you communication right now. Later on, we're going to introduce maybe waiting for it a little bit. So that way we can have them sitting at the table for longer and working for a meaningful period of time that they can learn new skills. So that's a great way. It works really well to avoid instances of challenging behavior happening and really offer respect to that individual and kind of working at their pace to honor their communication, but also you're communicating to them that, and just like maybe 15 more seconds or eventually 30 more seconds of work, and then that turns into 5 minutes, etc. So that's functional communication training. It's a treatment package consisting of, like you said, extinction, which is no longer reinforcing that behavior, and prompting the appropriate communication response that serves the same function or purpose of the challenging behavior.
Excellent, excellent. I just, I'm so jazzed about the whole thing, that's why I asked you if you had some time to talk about the program. I think it's very important for students to realize this opportunity and how it is so applicable to everyday life, your own personal life, your family, your nieces and nephews, the kids that you may be involved with if you're doing summer camp. There is so much ability to apply these techniques in everyday life. I think it's just, fantastic. Just fantastic.
Yeah, I'd recommend a great book on that I read early on and getting interested about behavior analysis, and having just graduated from my undergrad program. I read this book, What Shamu Taught Me About Life, Love, and Marriage. And I'm very anti like Shamu and everything like that, what they do at things like what is it, Waterworld, or where Shamu is?
Right, yeah, SeaWorld.
SeaWorld. That's, let's acknowledge that techniques of behavior modification, behavior analysis are being implemented, but not for like applied reasons that are socially significant to improve behavior. So behavior analysis works. You don't always have to be regulated by an ethics code, and unless you are credentialed as a licensed psychologist or a licensed behavior analyst, right? So there's a regulation of the field that helps it to maintain integrity with the clients that we serve. But still, we all have the power of punishment, and this stuff really works. And we all have the power of coercive control. And we all have the power of reinforcement, which is so much more powerful than we might realize. If we arrange the environment, we might not need those punishment techniques. And our ethics code is really designed to use those positive strategies and techniques with our clients to honor their communication and to best serve them, to help them function in their environment. So
that's really cool. Now, and I see kind of this relevance, especially from a cultural point of view, because there has been a lot of, especially with kids of color, and being kind of criminalized in the classroom. Kind of, we talk about the from public school to the prison pipeline, and using kind of these applied behavioral analysis techniques to minimize that on both sides of the channel, from the students as well as the teachers. And I kind of see that kind of application of looking at, what behaviors do we need to reinforce? What behaviors do we need to extinguish you know, can we take some of our biases out of how we see children based upon using kind of these applied behavioral techniques? So I'm a culturalist, so I'm always kind of looking at those things. And that's the other thing why I'm so jazzed about applied behavioral analysis, because of the techniques that you use in the application can be very much kind of appropriate in all courses of a child's life and adult's life. So
yes, there's a lot of great research, you know, looking at development and how important your environment is in your development. And it gives us a lot of hope to know that we can take advantage of this environment that is so important in one's development to help them to reach their best potential, if you will, or you know, develop communication in a way that's going to make certain other reinforcers more accessible to you later on in your life. And so what you're talking about kind of reminds me of some of that early research by Hart and Risley on meaningful differences in everyday experiences of young American children. I would just recommend, we probably don't have time to like talk about it. That's just another thing I'd recommend for people, is to just go research or look on YouTube up a video on meaningful differences in the everyday experiences of young American children by Hart and Risley. And you can see some of their research kind of on that topic you were talking about, looking at demographics of different individuals and realizing it's so important that their environment kind of structure their, especially early on, to structure their early experiences and learn behavior, so that, you know, we can look at their longer term outcomes being more positive in the end. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. So kind of our parting words, what would you recommend kind of a first step for students would be?
I'd say it's so important to follow your interests, and what populations you might want to work with is a really good start. For me, like I was a psychology undergraduate. My ears perked up every time I heard about autism, and I'd worked with a few individuals with autism before, and I'd had a couple family members with autism, and I realized that was also broadly developmental disabilities, extensive support needs, the more I studied, and I kind of chased that. And then I realized when I was looking for my master's program, I knew after graduating the psychology undergrad, my next goal was to get a master's, that, you know, something in autism was what I was searching. That's where I learned about applied behavior analysis. So that's personally how it worked for me, was to kind of chase that interest in the population I wanted to work with, and then looking at what is a really strong evidence-based practice to work with that population. And perhaps from there, you know, then you can hone in more on what particular areas you might like to focus on and get even more specific. And that's kind of what education is, from your undergraduate to the doctoral level. If you wanted to go to one day, you're really honing in on an area broadly in the undergrad, and then master's is a little bit more specific, and then your doctorate, it actually goes quite specific, where you're forging a new path in that area of your interest, and you're extending the research and literature in that area. So at all levels, you can study applied behavior analysis and other areas of psychology up to the point that or to the credential that you need to work with the people you want to. It is a helping profession, so most often cases you're going to be working with people in such a field. So there's so many different options and opportunities, and probably the best way to figure out which populations you like to work with is to get those direct experiences in a variety of contexts. So never be afraid to mix it up when you're kind of figuring it out, or do a couple different things at a time. I'd say when you're figuring it out, get those experiences and see what you like and don't like.
Oh, very cool. Now, let me ask you specifically about the UH program. Is it a, can you take a portion of it online? Is it 100% online? Is there, you know, classes that you have to come on campus to take? You know, since we're in this kind of ever-changing model of education, can you talk a little bit about how the program is set up?
Yes, it is actually fully online. So even if one is out of state, they pay in-state tuition in this fully online program To apply to the master's program, there is a specific application process, but then to apply to one of the verified course sequence program, the BCABA or the BCBA, if you already have the relevant degree or you're well on your way elsewhere, it's a quite simple process where you would just email me and I could take it from there for you. It's a free application process, and I just need to see one's transcript, and then I'll help to get you registered through Outreach College and have our staff send you CRN numbers for the courses ahead of each semester. So that's the way that works.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was going to say something else. Oh yeah, the online program, we do meet every week for most classes about once from the 4:30-ish to 7 period, although most instructors choose to meet about an hour and a half only. So they might choose like 5 to 6:30 typically is what I think most of us decide on for when folks are expected to show up to class synchronously. We have a lot of asynchronous content as well, like this such of an interview or watching a video or a pre-recorded lecture online, watching video models, things like that, and then course projects that are incorporated along the way. We try to have applied course projects where we can in classes that are particularly focused on applied applications, that is. So you might, for instance, be expected to do a certain assessment, or not a certain one, but a selection. You get to pick from a selection of assessments or intervention strategies that are going to work for a behavior that you choose with a student or client you're working with. So the students that do come through the program should know that it's important you have a job in the field, such as through working as a registered behavior technician while you're going through the program.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. Excellent. And you also mentioned there's a certification program, a certification piece.
Yes. So in addition to the so what you do is you do the coursework, right? Your degree and your supervision requirements. Then you have to take an exam. So the BCBA and the BCABA individuals, for those pursuing those credentials, they have to take an exam to pass to get to that credential or certification. Those pass rates are actually on average, probably somewhere around like 60–70%. But you can retest and retake it if you need. So don't let that scare you.
Right.
Different programs have different pass rates. Some of them are quite high. Ours at UH is above average, so that's good to know. Yeah, so you are taking the exam and then you get the certification. Now, to practice in your state, if your state has licensure, then you also have to get the license. So you have the BCBA. That makes you eligible to apply for licensure in most states alone. There's a couple states that might require a couple extra things, like New York, for instance, state. I think that's the only outlier at this point that's requires a little something extra. I think a few additional courses, or that your courses have to come in your master's program or something like that. It can't be a verified course sequence, or maybe it has to be in a behavior analysis specific program, not one housed in a psych program, or I forget what it is. But if you're going to New York, you're going to want to look into that. Other places, the licensure law for behavior analyst was developed off of a model licensure law written by the BCBA to make it easily transferable across states, where BCBAs can say move to Texas and just get licensure in Texas. All you have to do is submit the paperwork.
Okay, excellent. Well, I don't have anything else. What I'll do is I'll leave all the information, your information and UH program's information in the description. And if you have any questions, you can always contact me and I can shoot you over any additional information. So I would like to really thank you for taking the time out and informing us of this, very powerful career path. So I really appreciate that.
Of course, yeah. And I'll give you our program websites, and my email is there. It's also jninci@hawaii.edu if anybody needs to email me, and I can give you some more information if you're interested in the program. So thank you, Dr. Lucas.
You're welcome. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
I do too.